Nagarjuna's project is about showing that the samvriti sat level of description is ineliminable from our account of what there is. Paramartha sat cannot consist in what there really is instead of samvriti sat. And reason is on the samvriti sat side.
Yeah.
And what part of what he was saying is, we can't make sense of any supposedly ultimately true claim as something outside of the conventional, because it's only at the conventional level that we can make it. But, and this is where I had the point, my reservation about fictionalism, to say it's conventional isn't to say it's just made up by us, that it's just up to us. I do think reason imposes objective constraints, and how you make sense of that is another question. I don't think you have to go Platonic to make sense of it, but it's not up to us what is a sound argument, for example. I think there are objective questions about meaning and entailment and so forth.
What's the difference between a paradox and the both-and position?
I tend to lean pretty heavily and boringly on the etymology of the word paradox. It means beyond belief, something that is almost impossible to believe. Not every contradiction is paradoxical. Some are just stupid, right? I mean, contradictions of this kind, when you say A and B, right, where B is equivalent to not A, are most often just plain false because one of the conjuncts is false. If I say it's Sunday and it's Thursday, we don't say, wow, now that's a deep paradox, let's meditate. We say Garfield's stupid, right? And we'd be right to say that. But sometimes we hit sentences of the form A and not A, where both A and not A are arguably true. And at that point, when we hit these, and as I say, I think that Graham Priest is dead right about the fact that those occur in very special places. Those occur at the limits. And a lot of limits generate those. And Nagarjuna is doing limit thinking. And then those are, in a deep sense, beyond belief, right? It's very hard to wrap your mind around them. You immediately recoil. You say, there must be some way to fix this. And then you spend time trying to fix it. You create a Tarskian hierarchy, and then realize, my God, I can't even say that my theory is true. You try to create a Russellian hierarchy, and then realize that the quantifiers that you use have no domain, and so on and so forth, right? And finally, after doing all of that analysis that we might call analysis looking for the final nature of the set, or the final nature of truth, you realize that you're stuck with the contradiction anyway. And that's what fills me with admiration for Nagarjuna. He does the analysis, he comes up with the contradiction, he stares it in the face and says, recognizing this contradiction may challenge discursivity, but discursivity gets you there. And that's profound.
Isn't that similar to the image of the Trump-Lowell thing that I was talking about yesterday, or does that not strike you as similar?
It doesn't strike me as the same, no.
That condition of uncertainty?
No, because I don't see it as a condition of uncertainty.
Well,
or even of oscillation. I see it as a condition. See, the Trump-Lowell painting really is a painting and really isn't the sky.
Oh, no, it's of course.
It's not that it both is and isn't.
Just as a metaphor
sky.
is always a metaphor. Addition to whatever else, whatever.
Yeah, but that's why I'm saying I don't like that metaphor, because I just don't think it goes far enough. I think the liar is a better metaphor, the liar sentence. When I say this sentence is false, and I really have to struggle with what the truth value of that sentence is, and I recognize that the only thing I can do that's cogent is to assign it both truth values.
Well, then is it enough to be moved by this? And I'm still not sure, I mean, the transformation. You did agree that that's what we're talking about, the transformation to be moved. And I find this poem, I'm struck by this. And I was thinking about, here's another metaphor. There's the poem here, and here's the reason here, and here's me in the middle, And it struck me as perfect. I mean, I see these things all over the place. I see them, and,
I want to pick up on a few different things. in part, what you just said about being moved and the notion that arguments move us, it's not simply that we're moved, but we move from one place to another in the sense that we come to adopt a different point of view, a different perspective. For example, we may slowly give up our terror of the inconsistent and become quite at home and comfortable with inconsistency, and I think that's a good thing. The stories, Jay says the story of the shopkeeper who tries to peddle his, wonderful ware, which is this so-called nothing, or maybe it's the story of the stupid customer who wants to buy it. Goldman Sachs. Yeah, well, yeah, we see a lot of this these days. That's really true, isn't it? Yeah. But I mean, that story struck me way back when as well as being a very, it conveys an awful lot. And I think that as we're looking at these texts and these traditions and considering what it is that's being moved and where it's being moved to, and how that movement is happening, we can't very easily separate the meaning of the text into sort of the semantics and everything else. There's a whole worldview at play, and stories that attempt to portray the inconsistency of reality are abundant in Buddhist literature. So that many of the miracle stories of the Buddha or other kinds of instances in which what we normally think of as possible physically are challenged, or the story that Bill brought up. But of course, the Vimalakirti Nirdesha is rife with challenges to our idea of what's possible, and apparently paradoxical moments. I guess what I want to say is that I want to go back to what Jay said, the view about the fundamental nature of reality. If he defines Drishti in the final verse of Mula Madhyamaka Karika as a view about the fundamental nature of reality. And what I'm wondering is that if one were to somehow be moved by this collective of arguments and stories, metaphors and poems, if all of this sort of in a kind of totalistic fashion over time works upon a person, or if one is moved by it to a point at which one really does eliminate views about the fundamental nature of reality, if that were to happen, what would that look like? What would our experience be like? Would it really be true that we would never quarrel? Would we really feel peace? Seems like Chandrakirti and other thinkers are saying this, and I want to make sure that that when we talk about elimination of views, we're not simply leaving it in the realm of the philosophy seminar room, but that there's an impact on a person when they're, in other words, I may still have a view about who I think should be president, or who I will vote for, and I may have my reasons for doing that. But what is the nature of those conventional views if I've thoroughly conditioned my mind to relinquish views about the fundamental nature of reality? How would I behave in relation to these views? How would I hold them? I'm not saying they're not possible. I don't think Nagarjuna wants us to give up views, those kinds of views. Or my view that it would be better if we went to the Chinese restaurant tonight than the Indian. I have reasons for that view, and I think that's perfectly allowable, but how is my holding of that view changed if I have managed to do this very difficult and somewhat paradoxical thing of giving up views about the fundamental nature of reality? So that's a question really for everyone to think about. I would just like to meditate on it for myself. How will I disagree with my child when, who was it? Oh, Jamie, he's not here. When my child tells the principal of his school, you're a retardo. I mean, how will I react to these things that I don't like? I think these are the questions I want to think about and see how these Buddhist arguments and literature can help me.
This is the space in which compassion can open and respond, right? And compassion means that Vimalakirti takes on the sickness of the world, right? On the one hand, and the Vimalakirti also. It's not really it's a text that has a self-commentary running through it throughout the whole text. And the last, or the way I would read it, the last commentary the text begins at a kind of reflection on Buddha lands. Mm-hmm. And it closes with a reflection on Buddha lands. And the commentary we get on that is, well, there's some Buddha lands in which the Buddha uses language and reason. There's some Buddha lands where the Buddha uses ineffability and silence. There's some Buddha lands where the Buddha uses smell. There's some Buddha lands where the Buddha uses wondrous, splendorous visions. And all of those Buddha lands accomplish the Buddha way. Mm-hmm.
So we live in a world where we use reasons.
Right.
So we now have a challenge. It maybe would be a lot nicer to live in that smell realm. Supposedly they're very nice smells. So,
But I want to.
We don't live in a world of only reasons, Sarah.
Right.
We have smells here.
right.
But
I've noticed that.
I wanted to get back and sort of raise one last question that I've been thinking about in this conference. This conference has sort of made this question, sort of brought this question certain clarity to me, but I've been living with this personally for a long time, and I wanted to go back and sort of pick up on some comments you made on the very beginning of your comments the other day, where you talked about the connection between Drishti and presuppositions. Mm-hmm. And merely to point out, and this will not be news to anybody in Buddhist studies, but our views are constructed out of our desire.
Yes.
Right? So that the project, while I would say perhaps the kind of project of analysis and deconstruction in which reason may play a very, very important part that we see in Madhyamaka may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. And my understanding of how Drishti work is that they're often unconscious and unarticulated and don't always operate on, well, they're unarticulated and unconscious. They don't operate at a level in which cognition can get at. And that project of removing Drishti, all views, is also a project that has to get at that deeper, much more embedded, and much more difficult agglomeration of things we might call emotions and affects, and it has to get at the amygdala in some ways, right? I mean, I'm using the term metaphor, and I meant that metaphorically. But I'm thinking of Karl Rove. I mean, this is we live in a world. we live in a world in which this is one of the major dimensions of communication and suasion.
In terms of these deeper seated emotional, the amygdala, right? And on the other hand, you're talking about Drishti, and that we can access cognitively and deal with. I mean, this takes us straight to these, klesha vadana and janaya vadana. And it's always been in the back of my mind. I mean, I remember this going back to the Abhisamaya Alamkara and now we're back to the path stuff, right? And my understanding has always been counter to what I think is actually the tradition, is that Jnana Varana seem to me to be actually rather easy to get rid of. I don't have any problem. I don't think most modern people in the last 100 years actually do have an operant belief in permanently existing independent things. I mean, Einstein's been around for a long time. I think most of us know that this table is more movement. Quantum mechanics has been around for a long time too. The views, the intellectual views, our obstacles of knowledge seem to me to be not so difficult. They're, as we're talking, they're accessible to all of these projects of reason. On the other hand, the the reptile, the inner reptile, right? Who, I know, Peter, you've been trying to get him out of the basement lately and everything like that. But that inner reptile that's down in the basement, the Klesha Varana, seem to me, again, I think this goes against my understanding of the way the path works. But there's kind of there's a polemic in the path because it's only the Buddhas that get rid of the Jnana Varana, right? That's the distinction between the Shravakas. So there's a polemic there, but I think in terms of reality, I'm with you on this one. Those things are further in the basement. The cognitive shit's up in the attic, and we can. There's a trapdoor. We can go there and talk about it, as we've been doing all weekend.
There is going to be interesting work to be done in terms of understanding how the path actually works. And I think works in cognitive science and so on may help to understand Buddhist how certain practices help, right? And supposedly removing Drishti is supposed to help with this more profound emotions, right?
That again, if we think about the Madhyamaka Karkas and the Nagarjuna's project as a debate tradition, not just something you sort of sit down and practice and do with yourself or sit down with your teacher and discuss in a nice, quiet environment as you're sitting on your zafu, but as a debate tradition. What you do is you challenge the other person. The other person is holding a view. And the view that they're holding is something they hold really deeply. It's part of what they construct their own identity out of. It's about Atma Drishti, because it's Buddhism. And when you challenge the view that the person's holding, they get irrational. So I think you're right, Peter. Something strange comes out. And the veneer of the philosophical, of the calm, that one claims to be rational about is stripped away. Then you get to see what's going on underneath. I think the claim, though, would be, at least for the way I understand Chandrakirti, is that stuff is, it's not that the kleshas or the emotions are deeper than the cognitive. It's actually, all that is based on a cognitive commitment that we don't recognize for what it is. And that's the presuppositions that at least the way I would interpret what Jay was saying yesterday about digging up the presuppositions. And the kind of metaphor for that, to put it in stories, since Sandy likes stories, is the Zen story that we were talking about yesterday, Peter, which is a short Zen story about the samurai who thinks he has this wonderful enlightenment experience, comes to the Zen master and says, "Oh, I've understood emptiness now, and I'm empty, and you're empty, and I'm you, and you're you," and he starts going on doing all this emptiness rhetoric, and the Zen master has been smoking on his pipe, takes his pipe and bops the guy in the head. Samurai immediately starts pulling out his sword, and the Zen master says, "Emptiness is quick to show anger, isn't he?" And puts the sword away, bows, and leaves. And I think that's Nagarjuna's method. What we're talking about is Tarka and all that sort of stuff. That's the samurai saying, "Oh, we're empty." It's all true, maybe, in some way, but it's got nothing to do with reality. Reality is when you get bopped on the head.
And what do you do?
Well, but I think that's what Nagarjuna's method is. He's with argument, with debate. He's bopping people on the head, and he's getting that stuff out so you know it's there. Now you got to work on it.
Fundamental to organismic life. I don't think it's just simply a matter of philosophical positions. Philosophical analysis certainly can bring that out, and how fundamentally we grasp on to notions of ourselves as separate from others in our environment. But it's fundamental to organismic life. There would not have been evolution without organisms grasping onto life and trying to survive and reproduce. It's a constituent, from the Buddhist point of view, it's a constituent part of living beings and nearly impossible to eradicate. And reason is one weapon in an arsenal, to use a martial metaphor, of getting at that.
And how how deeply ingrained deeply a part of us this is from the Buddhist point of view. And I think then when we do see examples of beings who do remove Atma Drishti, even if it's just through narratives of the past, it's maybe perhaps not surprising that they do exhibit behavior that does seem a bit inconsistent. I mean, I kind of like Jay's idea of the inconsistency of reality, and I think that without Atma Drishti, you will live in an inconsistent reality more fully. Might be kind of fun.
And I think there's an important extent to which that's really what all religious traditions are dealing with is, David Foster Wallace says, it's about insignificance management. It's about the fact that each of us is the center of a world. For each of us, our ego is the horizon against which the whole world plays out. And reconciling that fact with the fact that we don't really make a difference or we're insignificant, reconciling the fact of being a perspective on the world with not mattering much for that is sort of what this is all about.
But I would like to pick up on a couple of these comments, and I appreciate Bill's comment because it gets at what I would see the depth of it, the embeddedness of it. But there are different ways to hold it, right? And I think in some ways, through this analytical process, while it may not be possible to eliminate in a practical way Atman Drishti, there may be a very different way to hold it. And that it is possible in any given circumstance, particularly in a circumstance when we can recognize it, to let it go. And then again, that's that's what I would see to be the space of compassion.
I'm just trying to think through what is the mechanism that you get from arriving at this paradoxical contradiction at the end of the logic process and getting to compassion. And it seems to me that the kind of litmus test as to whether you've actually had this kind of realization is if there's a reduction in your attachment. Nobody has really mentioned attachment specifically, but attachment is what arises when you have a vision, when you have a clinging to essences, and when you eliminate the view of essences, then you eliminate the tendency to grasp onto them, and when you have less a tendency to grasp onto them, then you naturally exhibit the compassion that's at the natural to us supposedly arises in the wake. But I guess I haven't heard that much about how, what is the litmus test, or what is the practical effect of having this, recognition of this view. How does it work? How does one, determine in one's own self whether it's working or not?